All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Liz Hume, and I'm the Executive Director at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And I'm sure everyone's like, wait, International Day of Peace was last week. And it was. But why is this so critical? Because the big fanfare was last week, and now, so what? So what do we do about it, and how do we move these issues forward? So I'm excited that we're doing this event today, making peace everyone's issue, how peace builders can tell the story of peace building in action to any audience. So I'm going to start off and say, as a sector, we do a really bad job at explaining what we do, why we do it, and that has got to change. So we did some research with frameworks about a year or so ago. It came out, and we do a really bad job at this. So what do we need to do differently? It seems simple, but it's really, really hard to do. One, stop with the crisis messaging starting off. We're not saying you can't do it, but can you do it later on in the text, not from the beginning? Because our brains shut down and we all want to crawl under the table. Two, interconnected. That is something that resonates with people. What happens here affects people over there, over here. And COVID was a good example of how interconnected our world is. Okay, so that's another piece of it, bridge building. Not in a sense of we have to come together and, be passive or civil to each other. That's not what we're talking about with bridge building. We're talking about active, ongoing. You have to keep building that bridge. It's not one and done. And it's a metaphor that people can really understand. Okay, so those are some of the key things that we found in our research. Now, again, we are really looking at what are programs out there, what is peace building, what is actionable and practical? How do we tell that elevator pitch? How do we get people to really understand what we're doing? I know if you're like me, I don't really think my brother understands what I do or what he's in business. So we have to get better at it. And that's the point of this session today. So we have a couple of folks that we know can do that, can talk a little bit about why, what their programs are and what they're doing in a very practical and actionable way in a very short period of time. So we're very excited that we have people on the ground doing this work. The first one is from Project Rosanna. And so they're going to discuss a little bit about health in Israel and Palestine. So Waji, take it away.
Hello, and thank you so much, and nice to meet everyone in here. So now it's 5:10. I'm trying to be very strict with the time so I can give my colleagues and peers here the time that they need. Very quickly, my name is Wajdi Bkirat. I'm a Palestinian Jerusalemite, live in Jerusalem. I was born and raised here in this city. With the ongoing conflict that is happening since I was born until nowadays. So I call it an ongoing conflict that is never stopped. So my role at Project Rosanna is Director of Project of Health Management and Research. And what we're doing is different kinds of projects, and they're all in health. The new slogan for Project Rosanna is health diplomacy, where we try to bridge between health actors in the region, especially in Israel, Palestine. And we have different sectors that we work on. We have the training sector where we bring together doctors to work on advanced trauma and life support. And they have, of course, connections between each other. Whenever there is a military mission or whatever happening, the Palestinian doctors consult with their colleagues in Israel and vice versa. So even in the time of the conflict, it's happening and it's going, because we're trying to always put together these people and just let them talk, let them practice things, let them know each other, because we think that lack of knowledge about nations and people is the key in this sector, and health is the the anchor to help these people to bring them all together. We have also another project, which is now we're partnering with IEP, the Institute for Economy and Peace in it, which is the Nursing Hub project. We bring together 480 nurses for the period of 3 years, and we bring them together from 8 different hospitals, 4 in the West Bank and 4 in Israel, in which we build the institutional cooperation between the hospitals and the personal professional cooperation between the nurses also. We give them specialized courses, and we try to improve their skills, both in professional and personal perspectives. Other project we have is the transportation, where we transport patients from Gaza and the West Bank to Israeli hospitals by the help of Israeli volunteers. They take them into their cars and they take them all the way to the hospital, and they have improved relationships between each other. I'll just give you a quick overview of a slide or a presentation that I want to present to you, just very quickly, and then so you can know more about the organization. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, that's perfect. So in 1980s, they started with WHO started the concept of bringing peace together through health. Project Rosanna was founded since 2013. And since its beginning, it tried to, as I said, bridge people together through health. And Project Rosanna, through its peace building approach, we have opportunities for people-to-people peace building between Israelis and Palestinians through health, thriving and enduring professional networks for cross-border medical collaboration, improved Palestinian healthcare capacities, and improved well-being of Palestinians and Israelis, I would say. Strategic and practical ties between health systems to inspire stable and beneficial bridges, and strengthen Palestinian health sector. So we have 3-track peace-building model. We work at the community level, at the grassroots level, where we engage between Palestinian and Israeli healthcare workers and patients. We have the institutional level, of course, by facilitating some dialogues, cross-border dialogues and partnerships between Palestinian and Israeli institutions. Governmental level, where we bring together the Israeli and Palestinian ministries of health, and we try to do some scenario building exercises and things to improve health in the region. The theory of change. We believe that if we bring these Palestinian and Israeli healthcare workers and professionals together and allow them to talk about the ongoing conflict through health, and we bring this dialogue between the institutions and the professionals, then they will build open channels, and the communication will start and develop between them and the institutions, of course. And there will be highly respected members of the societies who will be agents for delivering peace to others and to communities, because they are all influencers in their communities. Okay, this is the peace building syllabus where we partnered with IEP, as I said, and we're looking forward to make it a policy and a strategy for our work and include it in our mission and vision in our next and future projects. So we have online positive peace course, positive peace workshops, joint community-based projects, alumni networking and collaboration. Okay, just very quickly before I go to, so basically what we're trying to do is to increase the level of empathy and trust between both nations at all levels. I'll just show you very quickly a live example of the ATLS program that we had before. I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop sharing and then, no need. Okay, this is it. So this is the ATLS course, the Advanced Trauma and Life Support, in which this is an monitoring and evaluation report that we did for this project. The goal of this project is to provide joint training in ATLS for Palestinian and Israeli physicians, improve trauma capacity, and cultivating empathy between participants. So we increased cooperation between Palestinian and Israeli professionals and created a sustainable professional network. Just very live examples of an Israeli physician who said, it's my first time working with Palestinian doctors and I feel very comfortable talking to them in the future. A Palestinian physician said, we share a common interest and the same diseases. Therefore, we have to work with each other. As you can see here, the proportion of participants who evidence cognitive empathy for the other. For Palestinians, we had an increase of 92% in empathy, and for Israelis it was 95%. Empathy was tested through level of cooperation, perspective taking, and contextual understanding. And here we can see the difference between disaggregates, males, females, and total. Some interesting results. And the relevance, 100% of Palestinian physicians agreed or strongly agreed that working together on health projects is an important avenue for larger collaboration on health issues across Palestinian and Israeli communities. 100% of Israeli and Palestinian physicians agreed and strongly agreed that they would keep in touch with physicians from the other side. They intended to continue working with physicians from the other side, and that the cooperation between ministries of health is very important. That was a quick sneak peek, let's say, of the work that we're doing at Project Rosanna. I don't want to take time from my colleagues, and I'll leave it to the next speaker. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, so Laji, that was what I took away from that, empathy. You quantitatively can prove that through the work, you have increased trust and empathy, which is obviously critical in that region. So that, I think that's the quick takeaway from that piece of how you're actively trying to do it. Okay. Next speaker, Mariana from Movilizatorio. I'm sorry.
Movilizatorio. Don't worry. You can use short MOV, so it's easy.
MOV, yeah. Okay.
So thank you so much. I'm Mariana Diaz Kraus. I'm partner and institutional director at Movilizatorio. I'm going to share quickly my screen and hope to also be able to tell you all the things that I want to tell you in this short time. Please let me know if you're seeing my screen.
We are.
Perfect. So I'm going to just go really quickly on how we, of course, what we're doing in Movilizatorio. Movilizatorio is a citizen engagement and social innovation lab where we look forward on how we can actually empower civic, like youth, different leaderships and collective leaderships, so that this becomes the engine for social transformation. So what we actually do is we use different kinds of tools to actually get people to get moving and be active in their context and getting to go into action and stop and to actually be able to change their social context through movements and through different types of initiatives. So we are a Latin American-based lab, which is led by women and was founded by women. And we look to how we can actually move our different causes around and get the biggest impact in general. So today I'm going to talk about an example in Peacebuilding in Colombia. We worked in various issues, but in this example that I'm going to tell you, it's called Hagámonos Pasito. So it's a translation of let's be kind with each other. So in Colombia, there's right now, and especially within the peace process and the implementation of the peace accord, we are a very polarized society. Each family lunch can be actually a bit intriguing and difficult. So we look forward on how to create different tools on how to help from even this little sense. So this project, which we did in a company with the Ford Foundation, was on how we can provide good communication practices so that we can actually depolarize conversations and be able to build and to actually have a goal, a clear and common goal around it, and be actually able to to go further than just the polarized conversation that in Colombia peace is really critical. So we seek to strengthen civic ecosystems through the exchange of capacity and experiences among collective initiatives, organizations, media working in peace, and all the actors that are working on peace building. We did this through campaigns to encourage to have difficult communications. We did different knowledge sharing meetings. We took street actions, and we created a web page. Wait, it's not moving. I don't know why. Okay, perfect. So, considering the importance of civic technology for social impact, we used, well, how I just told you, three main tools. So, one, we created a landing page for the project with Hagámonos Pasitos, where users could evaluate the level of polarization of their opinions by answering a questionnaire, and with behind very nerdy work, we could give you like a diagnosis of how polarized you were, and with those answers, we could actually evaluate what type of skills you had and what other skills you could actually improve. And the platform also allowed us to create and to visualize figures of polarization in Colombia and the conversation of polarization in Colombia, and as well to explore tools that can contain examples, exercise, and key tips to the polarized environments. So one major example of what we did here is, for example, we used art as a part of this project in one of our street actions, where we carried out a significantly influential we were looking to influence national dialogue, so that actually people started talking and actually realized if they were really polarized or not, and what they could do about it. And we used, this is like a mimic of the famous kiss of the Berlin Wall, but these are two of the major opinion makers in Colombia that were kissing and saying normal polarization. So it was the responses were completely crazy around this issue. And we saw how moving along conversations can bring ideas on how actually we can come together and work together. So this is a really small example on how from civil society you can push forward and actually create conscience that all of us can be part of the solution and of peace building every day, from our very intimate scenarios and also to very public scenarios. So this was a very interesting way that we could actually balance it. We have a lot of different examples, but we wanted you to have this one, and of course, I would be happy to share more of Movilizatorio's work through emails or whatever you guys need. But this was it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think I made it.
You made it, and that was excellent. Because one of the things I didn't say initially is, you know what one of our biggest problems is and why we're so bad at this? We are wonky. We are technical. We are boring. And so what this campaign showed, or this work showed, it's cheeky, it's funny, it grabs people's attention.
We always say that we do very nerdy work, that we're all nerds in Movilizatorio, but we look on how we can create a sexy side so that these issues are accessible to others. Because sometimes they're too academical, or they're too political, or you don't know where you can actually stand and do your part. And civil society is a major engine for social transformation and peace building. So this is a way on how we can activate them.
Yes, and Kate and I were also saying, can we get this here in the United States? That's why we were laughing.
Yes.
But yes, making conflict prevention and peace building sexy. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, love it. Next.
Thank you.
Patricia, New Gen Peace Builders, doing great work. I always come to you for great examples of programs. One is Rice for Life, the work that you're doing here in the United States. Because I don't think you're talking about this one. People need to Google that. That is a great, practical, and actionable program that you've done in the schools. But I'm going to let you take it away and tell us, you're talking about peace building and education in Lebanon.
And so I am. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And I was just thinking that first example, your first story, so to speak, was about critical healthcare. And the second story was, I called it clever or cheeky. And I think Liz did too. And I thought that was really breakthrough, clever or cheeky. Perhaps you want to think about my story that I'm going to tell as how you continue momentum through case studies or case examples. And the reason I want to position it that way is, aside from being a senior fellow for peace education at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, I head New Gen Peace Builders and Youth in Peace and Action. And so we have done education, training, and mentoring in this very process-oriented, crafted, education-based way with 10,000 peace builders in various states and countries. And so I chose Lebanon because I think Lebanon is a great example of what happens when you start to tell stories where people can see themselves as the peace builders. I love that line in the video, not by one of us, but by all of us. So this is a story about how you use peace education to equip peace builders so that they can produce projects, and then they can be profiled, and their case studies become stories that inspire the rest of us and keep the momentum going. So the story in Lebanon starts like this. Just before 2019, one person came to us and said, why is it we don't have an integrated peace education training and mentoring program in Lebanon like the one that I'm seeing that you do in these various states and countries? Could you please come to Lebanon and work with university students in the year 2019? Now, as anybody knows, there's a tremendous amount of education and training and activities around peace building in Lebanon. But what they were saying was, oh, we see you're blending, you're integrating peace project management, fundamentals of peace and conflict resolution with a requirement that a team or teams be supported and coached and mentored to do actual peace projects. And that was the difference. So 100 university students were specially selected from across 11 universities in Lebanon. And they went through this intensive program that over a span of time involved 6 days of learning and experiences, and then 3 months of coaching and support for their peace projects. Now, in a moment, I'm going to tell you what came out of it, but here's the rub. The program really, after this initial suggestion that we get going, got started in 2020. And so here's what life looked like in Lebanon in the year 2020. There had been a significant explosion in the port of Beirut. COVID-19 was underway. The economy took a nosedive, and suddenly food insecurity skyrocketed to 70% of the population. The electricity and internet began not to work. The educational system was under pressure, and there began to be another exodus out of Lebanon. So for instance, last year alone, 2.47% of the population left Lebanon. Okay, and became part of at least a temporary or extended diaspora. And the years before were 1.9% and 1.7%. So it was a crazy time to be doing this training and to be suggesting to university students that they were going to do breakthrough peace projects. It turned out, we like to say around the projects in Lebanon, against all odds, there were some very nice things achieved. So one of these 100 students is now a candidate for a Rotary Peace Fellow. Several have decided to go study peace and conflict resolution at an advanced level. But the projects that were done were so interesting. And so the one I would quickly highlight is a project in which a team recognized that despite food insecurity rising to 70% of the population, there was still a tremendous amount of food waste with local restaurants. And so using technology and some very interesting process management methods, they created a project to actually link restaurants with this leftover food and this wasted food with individuals and people in need, and particularly in communities that experience prolonged differences in sect or religious or political views. And that project was actually identified by the World Food Program as one viable for the World Food Program's innovator incubator. So it was really exciting. So these were the sorts of things that were accomplished, but then a third of the participants in the program were tapped and trained as ambassadors to go and repeat aspects of their learning experience in their communities. So they became the peace instructors using many of our tools and methods. So very interesting, very successful. And some of the students have actually gone on and created the first New Gen Peace Builders Impact Club in Lebanon, so they can carry on these projects. Okay, so last but not least, where do you go from here? And we all looked around and said, oh, what next? And I want to thank the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for a report that they put out in 2019 that basically says, it's called Arab Horizons, Paths and Pitfalls to Renewal. And they recommend 4 things: new investments in human capital as vital stakeholders in transformation, new accountability to overcome patronage networks that dominate society, new institutions, capacity building at local and municipal levels, and new incentives, new rewards for merit, innovation, and initiative. So next stage is round 2. And so round 2 looks like this: a similar program with 25 to 35-year-old professionals in Lebanon, who obviously have more position, more gravitas, and more ability to influence local and municipal peace building. And we've created an initiative called Integral Peace Leadership. By the way, in the field of peace building, there really isn't such a thing. There have been calls for it for a long time, but baby steps have been taken. So this program for 25 to 35-year-olds integrates transformational leadership, coaching and support for projects, trauma and healing expertise, as well as the principles and foundations of peace building and conflict mediation and conflict resolution. All the participants will have to go through a similar experience of being coached and supported quite intensively. And over a period of 3 to 6 months, they will be coached to support the creation of peace projects. One last twist: our observation is sometimes when you do these kinds of educational initiatives, you invite participants to imagine or invent their peace projects. We believe that we will do it differently on round 2. We'll actually partner with organizations that already have projects in play or projects that need to get done that can be municipal, but have the potential to scale. And so the projects will have quite an intentionality about them. The last thing I would say is from the ground up, from the ground up, from the ground up, especially in fragile states, the path to success, or one path to success, is again, not imposing what needs to be done, but instead listening to what needs to be done and supporting these peace builders at the local level, but with the kinds of skills that you normally wouldn't get until you're in some sort of advanced peace building program. That's the story of Lebanon for the moment.
Thank you, Patricia. And I forgot to say that about the research that showed on how do we tell our stories. Don't focus on one person. Because when you do, then I say, well, Kate's amazing. I can't be Kate. I can't be Malala. I can't be Greta. The point is focus on the fact that this was work together. So absolutely 100%. And peace projects at the university level and bringing them to scale, looking around and seeing what are the issues there. And that the fact that students can have an impact on the problems that they're seeing in their communities. So that's what I just took away from your presentation. Phenomenal. Next is the Center for Promotion of Human Rights and Development in Africa. Samuel, take it away. Samuel?
All right.
Yeah.
Yes, can everyone hear me? For some reason,
Yep.
It's saying that I cannot start my video. I'm not sure if it's my bandwidth. But yes, it's...
We can hear you, Samuel. Go ahead.
Try now, Samuel. Yep, there we go.
Okay,
Okay,
sure.
perfect.
Thank you. Nick, no need to project. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak a little bit about CPHD's experience working more specifically in the violent extremism field throughout West Africa. We've been implementing this very interesting project called West Africa Strategic Communications Project. The project was thought out of the many shortcomings in trying to address a complex issue, the complex issue of violent extremism in West Africa, that is even being more complexified by misinformation and disinformation. As you know, where now you have a mix of state actors as well as violent extremist organizations using very elaborated tactics to ensnare and enroll vulnerable populations. The project is regional in nature because we understood very well that there is a commonality in terms of languages throughout West Africa. For instance, the project is working in Cameroon, Nigeria, Niger, and Mali. Why did we decide to work with those countries? It's because if you look at Cameroon, Niger, and Nigeria, for instance, you have a large swath of population that is of Kanuri descent. And so when Boko Haram, for instance, decides to recruit, they do not stop, let's say, at Nigeria. They're looking at that sort of population where they share a common culture, like I mentioned, for instance, the Kanuri, and they have a very specific propaganda that is geared towards that particular population group. And it's the same thing when you're looking at the Fulani, for instance. Right now, when we talk about violent extremism in Mali, people keep focusing on the Fulani. But if you look at how the Fulani occupy West Africa, you realize that you find them almost everywhere in West Africa. And so there is a discourse when someone like Amadou Koumfa, for instance, is trying to recruit. He's not only gathering or trying to ensnare folks from Mali, he basically has the whole of West Africa as his playing ground. So we thought about coming up with a strategic communication project because the issues are many, but oftentimes the means to address the issues are small. And so we thought about working with community radio, because in West Africa, radio, it's still one of the most widely used means of communication. It's available almost everywhere, and it's cheap to work through radio. That was the first thing. The second thing was to think about a product that will speak to people, a product that people are used, a way of communicating that people have been using for years. And we decided to go through a PSA, public service announcement, because rooted deep into the culture of the many people that we're serving in West Africa, you have the traditional speakers, for instance, who go from town to town and deliver messages. So instead of using that medium, we decided to go with community radio. And with the community radio, we decided to develop 10 public service announcements. And the public service announcement basically were designed to address the narrative that is being put forth oftentimes by VEOs. For instance, we know that in the region, they put a narrative highlighting demand for purity, for instance, trying to enroll young people by putting religion at the forefront, saying that if you want to be more pious, you need to do X, Y, Z. So we designed the PSAs addressing specifically that strategy, which is the demand for purity, and basically trying to address the doctrine of persons approach that these groups have rather. We conceive another PSA to address the us against them, but also specifically trying to in the PSA bring out the fact that VEOs oftentimes try to isolate folks that they recruit from the family and friends. So basically trying to prompt a change in behavior. There's also this whole issue of milieu control, right? where you have groups such as ISWAP, JAS as it's known in Boko Haram, or JAS as it's known in Nigeria and in the region, really good at trying to control the milieu, and especially in rural areas. So we had to design another PSA to address the issue of milieu control. The fourth one that we worked on, and I think it was a very interesting one, was the dispensing of existence, which basically put in context the strategies that these groups are using to basically attract those
Samuel, I'm sorry. I need you to wrap up. What's the last thing you want us to take away from this?
Last thing that we can take away from this for us was the replicability of what we were doing, given that the means to address those issues sometimes tend to be small. We came up with a strategy that will allow us to touch as many people as we can with as little means that we have. Thank you.
Okay, so PSAs on messaging is what I took away from your presentation, and how to replicate it. Okay, so those were some examples of programs of work. Now, there's a lot of great stuff there, but it also shows, and this is, I'm just going to say it, lots of great material there, but we also have to work on all of our presentations, right? And how we make this elevator pitch, and how do we, highlight our work. And so that's one of the things, and AFP has to do it too. This is not something that, we're pointing our fingers at our members. We're saying it's our work too. Moving on into PeaceCon next year, we are going to require that people presenting work more closely with us, and also watch a video we have by an individual who I learned so much when I was presenting one time. He actually worked with me as a coach. And so we have an incredible presentation on how do you tell your story. And that's really what we have to work on as a field. So it's not, and again, it's not something we're saying you have to do. It's something we're saying we all have to do it. Okay, incredible stories there. And I want to thank you so much for sharing those stories with us. Okay, moving forward, this session, really looking at integration. This is the next piece that the peace building field has to be working on. Integration, integration, integration. One of my new things that I said when I was up at UNGA is we have to earmark the earmarks. We have to earmark the health earmarks. It's my next thing. I'm going after it. So, what? Yeah, we're doing it. So we have to integrate, but we have to make the case for why. So I'm going to turn this over now to my dear friend, Michael Collins from IEP, who they do incredible research and making the case on data. As I always say, data equals good policies. Good data equals good policies. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you very much, Liz, and hello, everyone. Yes, although I'd like to think that we definitely contribute to the message of peace building, I can confess that at the level of IEP, we've got very much the same similar challenges. I mean, my wife and I have been married for 8 years now, and to this day, I've explained to my father-in-law, the work that I do hundreds of times, and to this day he still can't describe it to other people. And it's not on him, it's on me simply not being able to sort of communicate the kind of work that we do in a way that relates and kind of sort of connects with people. So I definitely think there's an opportunity for us all to do that, but at the same time being able to leverage some of the stories and approaches that we've seen today is absolutely phenomenal, right? I mean, the initial message about this is the first time that I've talked with a Palestinian doctor. I mean, how powerful is that as a single message from a single person that can really reflect the broader impact of programs such as like this? The shock and awe approach of Movilizatorio, Patricia's approach with regards to engaging young professionals and specifically how to connect that then with existing projects and how the peace building component can be incorporated there. And of course, Samuel with this sort of messaging and counter messaging through a radio format, tremendously impactful stuff. So what I'd love to do is to bring in kind of sort of an extra layer in here, specifically in relation to organizations that either partner directly with the local organizations that were presented today, or alternatively, indirectly through grant making, but also act as kind of sort of a connector between the work of local organizations and policymakers and investments, whether those be at the multilateral level, the national level, or even at the philanthropic and private sector level. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome our three panelists today. Brittany Brown, Director of OTI, which is the Office of Transition Initiatives, CPS at USAID. Matilda Bodart, Technical Officer, Health for Peace at the World Health Organization, and Kate Phillips Barrasso, VP, Vice President, Global Policy and Advocacy for Mercy Corps. Brittany, I'd love to be able to start with you, if that's okay. OTI is a really interesting kind of sort of beast. My understanding is that it's in many ways very similar to the Peace Building Fund at the UN, in the sense that you guys are a lot more flexible and have a lot more discretion potentially than some other departments. It also enables you to be able to work in many, many different spheres, all of them connected to sort of conflict prevention and strengthening democracy, for example, but gives you that ability to be able to get to what Liz was referring to, right? This integrative programming model. If you could tell us a tiny bit more about your overall approach, and more importantly, perhaps, how you're able to connect with a lot of the different kind of sort of organizations similar to the ones that have been presented today.
Absolutely. First off, Michael, just so you know, your father-in-law not listening to you might be a bigger thing as opposed to just storytelling. But I will say, you know, it is really important that we all learn how to tell our stories, because it is really tricky. So as a small office within USAID, right, just to give people some numbers, USAID is right a $30 billion a year organization. And then OTI, my office is closer to around 250 million. And then we go down to our grants, which average around $40,000. So when you start to think about what some of the work that I'm going to talk about, those are kind of some of the numbers to give you an idea of how we work. So OTI, we're a small contingency office. We work in anywhere from 13 to 22 countries at a time. And we focus on small grants to local organizations, much like all the people that we've heard from this morning or this afternoon. And the way that we do this is we really think about local organizations and how do we empower them. And so OTI doesn't build movements. OTI doesn't make movements. We look for organizations just like the ones we heard from that actually have a little bit of energy, whether it's, you know, we think of it sometimes as like a small wave, and how can we come in and turbocharge that wave so that it actually can have some staying power? What are the things that are missing to give those peoples and those communities the ability to move on and to, you know, create catalytic change in their countries? So it's small grants. It's co-created with our team, with our OTI team, and with our implementing partners that we're thinking about these things together. And we're constantly adapting. So it means that we don't come in and say that we're going to do, you know, this type of program and it's going to stay that way. And it's a 4-year strategic plan. And that's what we're doing. And we're going to stick to it. Instead, we're constantly asking ourselves, what's working? Is this working? Is it not working? So I'd say it's really important. We hold to our core the importance of calculated risk taking. So we want to think about how we can take risks and how we can be really creative in the way we do this. So I have a couple of examples I was going to give. So you interrupt me when we're hitting my time. But a few, I know, okay, Michael has a few stories of this. So one example is that in Iraq, we were noticing that there was some, I mean, it's been going on for 20 years, but about 2 years ago, we started to see up in Sinjar province, we started to see that there was just a lot of ethnic tensions that felt like they were fizzling up to the top. And one of the reasons that we noticed this was happening is that all of the media organizations were politically affiliated. So all the media that was out there was all politically affiliated, which meant the language was polarized, that it was constantly trying to pit groups against each other. So our team, our Iraqi staff, went up and just spent some time in Sinjar and started to pay attention about where those movements were. Where were those waves where we saw things? And we discovered 5 women that were all friends, and they all wanted to be journalists. And they were doing amazing stuff on TikTok and WhatsApp and all the other social media things. They were doing lots of great things, but they kind of just needed a little bit of training. So we could bring in some folks to do a little bit of training about how do you do civic activism journalism? What are the things that really catch on? Because you better believe they saw what worked on TikTok, but what are some of the things about photography, like where you take angles of pictures and how do you do different things? Just a few small things. We were able to buy them a little bit of equipment so that when they were posting their stuff up on YouTube or wherever, it actually was of the same quality as these media organizations that were being run very well funded, very well supported political media organizations. And we took a risk on them. This was just 5 women. They had no, they weren't an organized NGO. They weren't registered in Iraq. It was just 5 women we could give a small grant to, and often in kind, right? It was things like, we'll pay for this training. We'll give you some cameras. And they were able to join to really become, a credible media organization. So fast forward then, a year later, they're doing all kinds of things in the community, getting lots of attention for being this really good, credible organization. And then 25 families start returning to Sinjar. And these are families, with Yazidi backgrounds. And we started to see these tensions erupt. And next thing you know, all over the media, we are seeing mis and disinformation around how these Yazidi families were coming in and they were burning mosques. They were, breaking into religious sites, and none of it was real. And because these 5 women had developed this incredible media organization, they were able to pull together all the religious sects from the area, clerks and other folks from the area, and have a conversation about what was going on and immediately calm down the conflict that you could see just exploding. And so as we saw all of that, we're able to just find these small groups of people. And there's places all over that we're doing this. Another example that sort of plays into this that I want to talk about is Honduras. So in Honduras, we had a program from 2012 to 2018. And anybody who knows anything about Honduras back then or even today, you know that gangs and security are a major issue. But you can't just walk into a community and start talking about gangs. You can't start talking about security because it's a pretty touchy subject. Much as we heard of folks about, like, you get in through health, you get in through food, you get in through other ways. So we came in and we started just trying to create community. And when we got there, we realized that what was going on is that people just didn't feel united around different things. So we could start planning soccer games. We could start doing things that were much more just on the community level. How do we get folks together? And once those groups of people started to join together and see that they're not so different, right? That there isn't that much of a difference of, folks in the communities, they actually realized how powerful they were. And we could slowly, after a long time of building trust, start bringing up issues of security and gang violence. And with that, we saw that these people could actually be more powerful than the government, more powerful than the security forces, more powerful than the gangs, because they joined together as a group. And again, this is the US government, right? So we're gigantic. And OTI can drill down into this very local community level. And the reason it matters for these policymakers, this bigger discussion that's happening in Washington, is you better believe at the White House, they're desperately trying to hear what is happening on the ground, in the field, in country, from communities. And so there's a few things that we can do as policymakers because we're doing these types of grants. And it means that we're able to give the local perspective. We're able to talk about that this stuff is a little bit more complicated than just, a peace agreement that's decided between a bunch of elites sitting in a Capitol. Like all of these things that I'm talking about, the folks in the Capitals or in Washington, D.C. or at headquarters, we have lots of brilliant ideas. But you know what? None of those ideas were the ideas that I just described or any of the hundreds or thousands of projects that you're all doing or the projects that we're all doing. So in Washington, we can sit here and we can take all of these amazing things that we're hearing from the field and we can take them to the State Department, to, Administrator Power sitting in USAID when she's going over and, meeting with the President of the United States and talking about these things, she can actually represent the local communities. And the thing that is nice about it is it manages expectations so that whether it's Ethiopia and a cessation of hostilities is signed and everybody expects, okay, peace is going to reign in the streets in Ethiopia. And here we all are, like coming up on, I think we're probably at 10 or 11 months since that was signed. And we know there's not peace in the streets of Ethiopia. So we can help manage those expectations and talk about how complicated these conflicts really are and how complicated things are because of all the incredible work that many of you are doing and that we get to learn from all of you. So I think I could keep going, but I probably should stop.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much, Brittany. And although we didn't sort of talk about sort of techniques for integrated programming, the two examples that you gave were absolutely fantastic of that, right? Number one, kind of sort of the journalism component and the ability that once you have that power, you can then start to tackle serious issues in whatever sector, in whatever sphere. As it pertains to whatever element of society. So integral, skills and capacities that can then serve to build peace in a variety of different ways. So many congratulations on that work. And I'd love to be able to come back to you, Brittany, perhaps in the Q&A section, specifically about what are the kinds of messages that resonate or work for you internally when you're having meetings with the Samantha Powers and other decision makers or congressmen and congresswomen that you sort of come back to time and time again. Perhaps they were those, perhaps there are some others. But for the time being, I'd love to be able to hand it over to Mathilde. And Mathilde, there's actually a question that came up in the Q&A, which I'm going to leverage to a degree. Obviously representing the World Health Organization, an extremely large UN body, that has, earned, as far as I understand, tremendous amounts of respect before, after, and during the COVID-19 pandemic. I understand that it was actually a very big sort of couple of weeks up here in New York as part of the UN General Assembly. For the first time, there was sort of a heads of state summit on pandemic prevention and preparedness and response. There were new commitments to preventing and caring for TB, for example. There was another sort of commitment for working towards universal healthcare. So a lot of significant advances is what we would consider to be sort of the highest multilateral level. Yet one of the core questions presented here in the Q&A, and this is an open invitation to people to go ahead and submit their questions now, is that, well, actually, we didn't hear much about that. There was obviously a lot of talk about who was visiting the General Assembly, but a lot of the conversation went to what was happening at Climate Week, right, which was a separate event entirely. So perhaps it's a twofold question. Number one, with regards to the World Health Organization, invariably you spend a lot of time working in conflict and post-conflict countries that are considered fragile. So please speak to us a bit more about what resonates and what you find to be most useful and what you dedicate most of your time to as part of Health for Peace. But if you could also please touch on this element of how can we actually kind of sort of, better connect the health messages specifically with peace building, especially in these great opportunities that we have, such as the General Assembly.
Thank you so much for the questions and thanks for the invitations. I'll try to make sure I speak intelligible language, although it is a challenge for all of us here. Well, first, let me introduce the topic. Why are we talking of health and peace? I'm pretty sure the audience is actually quite surprised seeing WHO on a panel dedicated to peace building. We do believe health and peace are connected. And in fact, WHO's Director General, Dr. Tedros, likes saying there cannot be health without peace, and there cannot be peace without health. WHO has been working on this since the 80s, 90s, as our colleague from Project Rosanna also mentioned. Yet we've launched in 2019 an initiative that is more institutionalized, so to speak, and that is called the Global Health and Peace Initiative, that aims at strengthening the health sector's contribution to improving the prospects for peace through its regular work, through its regular health programs. So we're not saying we're becoming a peace building organization, but what we do say is that through health programs, we can contribute to some peace outcomes, we can contribute to strengthening some peace factors, and definitely try to avoid aggravating some conflict factors. And that's a key point. So let me explain to you what we're trying to achieve and provide a few examples. Basically, our approach has 2 or 3 components. It first says, okay, we need to better understand the context. We cannot work in a conflict blind manner. We need to understand conflict dynamics. We need to understand conflict actors and not just focus on delivering a certain number of medicine, on helping a certain number of healthcare centers, or delivering on vaccination campaigns, or coordinating an emergency response. No, we have to do that, being aware of what's happening around us in terms of peace and conflict dynamics. And we need to coordinate with all those actors. We need to talk with governments. We need to talk also with the peacebuilding sector. Why do we think it's important to better integrate peace and conflict analysis, or let's call it context analysis, into our work? As I've said, first is because we want to make sure we do not do any unintentional harm, that we do not aggravate any conflict factor, for instance. And that can be easily done just by targeting the wrong beneficiaries, or at least not targeting some affected populations, some populations in need of assistance or for access to healthcare. So we should not be in a position where we unintentionally replicate exclusion factors that have been a factor of conflict in a given setting, and that easily happens, or that can easily happen. We also want to do a bit more than just avoiding doing any harm on communities and on peace and conflict dynamics. What the Global Health and Peace Initiative also says is, where we can, where risks are limited, let's try and go a step further and contribute to achieving some peace outcomes, or what we call, let's do peace responsive programming. But that's language from our field. What that means is, for instance, while you are running your local health committee, like we're doing in far north Cameroon, with the objective of engaging with the community on what are their health needs, what are the issues they're facing, why don't you also try to address underlying tensions between and within communities by using a peacebuilding approach to dialogue? We've been doing this again in far north Cameroon, in partnership with IOM, with the government of Cameroon, of course, and the Department of Peace Operations with PBF funding. And there are some amazing success stories about this, such as in one specific village that is hosting an IDP camp with former Boko Haram combatants in it. You can imagine the amounts of tensions, fears, most often based on just stigma and fear of the unknown, fear of the other. You can imagine the kind of atmosphere, the kind of tensions that exist between those IDP or former combatant populations and the hosting communities. Both are in needs for health assistance or improved access to healthcare, let's say. And basically what's that local health committee realized is that they can build a bridge between those former combatants and the hosting communities just by integrating members of those two groups into the health committee. As soon as former combatants or IDPs integrated that committee together with the local or the hosting community, we had two main results, two visible changes, both on health and peace aspects. One, improved vaccination, reduced resistance to vaccination campaign, which was also an issue that I did not mention, but that was a major problem in that area. Because people did not trust the stakeholders in charge of the vaccination campaign for various reasons. They did not trust their interlocutor. But as soon as you integrate people from their respective communities, you help building confidence, and then you help sensitizing people about the importance of vaccination. You hear their concern and you can answer to them. And second, in terms of peace building outcome, what we saw is reduced stigma between the two communities, or from the host community mainly towards the former combatants community. And related to this, reduced fears, and related to this, reduced tensions. So that's just one example that illustrates how simply an existing health or health labeled activity can also contribute to some peace building outcomes. So, and by the way, this is just echoing something that I would like to just stress that was mentioned by our colleague from Project Rosanna. People-to-people peace building can make a lot more than what we may think. And it's very important to understand here that WHO, through the Global Health and Peace Initiative, is mainly to work at that level, at people-to-people, at a people-to-people level, at a community level, or at an intermediary level. Not saying that we're not working at national level or international level on some initiatives. And in fact, in the Middle East, we have a regional office that is very engaged on all of this, and they've been trying to improve collaboration between countries through health diplomacy, through collaboration over health issues. And of course, you can all think of the COVID pandemic and how it was a major entry point for this. I think some key messages I'd like to also share to the peace building community here as to how we can continue promoting the integration of peace building in the public health sector is that we need to do this all together. WHO, again, does not want to do this alone. We want to work in partnership, not just at community level or at country level, like we do in Cameroon or we're doing in Guinea-Bissau, in Somalia, in Burkina Faso, and in other countries. But also for research, monitoring, evaluation, and learning efforts. And related to this, for advocacy efforts, I think it's very important that all parties to this joint effort trying to promote the sustaining peace agenda of the UN work together to generate evidence on the positive impact and results of working through a health and peace approach. I think Liz said it's important that to explain why this matters. And that's what we've been trying to do over the last few years within WHO and with partners. And people are starting to get it, and an increasing number of stakeholders are engaging on health and peace programming. But more awareness raising needs to be done. And I think we're going to be able to promote this kind of work by doing more and more on the ground. Joint programming or receiving technical expertise from the peace builders of this world who can really provide their support to the medical or the public health stakeholders of this world will help tremendously. I think donors also need to be flexible in terms of allowing for cross-sectorial funding. And maybe be a bit more picky when it comes to assessing project proposals and requesting conflict sensitivity to be mainstreamed in any sort of programming, I mean, across sectors, really. Yeah, so I think these were my key messages for today. I hope I've answered your questions. Thank you so much, Michael.
Phenomenal, Mathilde. Thank you very much. And I mean, there's multiple things to touch on, but you did bring up at the tail end there the adaptive programming component that I perhaps would like to ask our next speaker about. But I mean, number one, for everyone on the call, that is obviously an open invitation to partner and to collaborate with the World Health Organization. And I think that you know, even those very simple examples that you gave of making sure, you know, to have an inclusive approach when it comes to constituting a health committee in this particular instance in Cameroon, and you know what you sort of talked about, the tangential or the indirect impacts of that from a peace building perspective are tremendously important messages, and I'm very glad that you shared them. And it kind of sort of makes me wonder, you know, how much we can actually leverage or should be leveraging these messages more when we're thinking about things like the General Assembly. You know, there's always a danger when starting with a personal story for it to be cliche or for it to seem tokenized at the same time. So it's always a very fine balance. But I do feel that oftentimes we do continue to get very much lost in the technical and not focusing enough on the personal. So thank you very much for that, Mathilde. And with that, I'd love to be able to hand it over to Kate. And again, inviting questions at the Q&A for everyone. After Kate, I will be passing some of the questions back to our initial panelists today. Kate, welcome. As VP of Advocacy and Communications with Mercy Corps, of course, you're deeply kind of sort of involved in trying to sort of, not only as an organization support the work of local peace builders, but also collect those messages and sort of pass them on and upwards. But Mathilde also referred to sort of do no harm, right? Or conflict sensitivity. Now, Mercy Corps is in many ways sort of a master of that, in the sense that it is something that has been sort of a foundational pillar within Mercy Corps for a very, very long period of time. So if you could, and looking at it from the moment of a perspective of a very large international non-governmental organization, can you tell us a bit more about sort of the methods and the steps that you take to make sure that your programming is conflict sensitive, and what potentially we could learn, us other organizations, through implementing in a similar way?
And can I just say one thing before you start? Yeah. Mercy Corps does such a phenomenal job at using examples and data to do this. And more importantly, they share. They put their reports out there and they share. And that's another thing that the peace building field has to work on. So I want to say that.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to have other people say it instead of myself. And I'm also going to touch on a little bit, because it was in the questions I was given before the panel. We just heard from Mathilde as sort of a broader representative of the health community, but to talk particularly about integration as it relates to the humanitarian community. I actually have much more of a humanitarian background and joined Mercy Corps specifically because I was tired of working in just the humanitarian community, because I was seeing all of these connections and feeling very frustrated by the lack of integration, by the lack of intentionality and taking peace building approaches or approaches to address the root drivers of conflict or climate change. And so Mercy Corps was a really natural place to land. So I think, I also just left UNGA, like I think a number of members of who are sitting here today, and had moments where, it was a very big rah, SDGs at the midpoint moment, trying to kind of build momentum to keep the progress going. But there were some very sobering moments there when statistics like we were only 15% of the way to meeting the SDGs were thrown about. And to me, it did not seem like a surprise at all. And there was talk about how do we, invigorate progress in these areas. And nowhere did anybody talk about integrated programming. There was a lot of talk about more money, which again, no mystery. We could all use more resources. But it was shocking to me to hear all of these development-oriented conversations, of which Mercy Corps is a part, with no one really recognizing what a barrier to developmental and health progress lack of peace around the world is wreaking, right? Like I think, and those in this room know very well, there's a tremendous cost to global GDP as a result that no amount of overseas development assistance is ever going to replace. So I think I just stop there and say, I think there's a long way to go in our messaging, not in fear mongering, but pointing out the cost of inaction in this space. It's not peace building because it's nice and people should get along. It's because this is limiting progress on everything. And if you care about health, if you care about getting kids in school, you have to, by definition, care about peace building. So that's the biggest message that I'd put out there. And I mentioned the humanitarian community before, and I'm speaking great generalities here, but I do think that there's still a lot of barriers, even though there's been a lot of talk over the past several years about first it was the humanitarian development nexus, and then all of a sudden a P started appearing at the end of HDP nexus. But this was all, I think, especially from a humanitarian perspective, great abstractions, right? There was no practicalities on how to make this happen. And I think the questions that I most heard often from my humanitarian colleagues, and it were, or the statements they'd make were, we don't have time for this, right? Or we don't have resources for this. We don't have the technical skills for this. And also, I think one that's a bit of a fallacy, which is peace building by nature is political, and we need to be neutral. We don't have a place in this. And I think on the flip side, for peace building actors are often met with in the humanitarian world, which is a massive world that operates on major scale, that's sometimes hard to penetrate, has a very specific architecture with the cluster system, by the way, none of which are dedicated towards peace building or community building. They're dedicated to things like shelter and camp management. A very difficult space to enter, and oftentimes not really feeling invited or welcome to come into those spaces. So I really think that the solution to that, and something I think Mercy Corps does very well, is getting past abstractions and these constructs that have been set up for us, the development community, the humanitarian architecture, peace building institutions and organizations, and just looking at situations, right, with a peace building and conflict lens, right, whether it's a peace building program or a climate change adaptation program, or a program to build resilience in some of the dry lands of northern Kenya or Ethiopia. We are always applying what we call the advancing peace and complex crises lens. I think that's another point I'd make here is I think that the humanitarian community tends to look at peace as something on a very linear trajectory, like, well, it fell apart, and so here we are, that's why we're here. And then when this is over, then we can start talking about reconciliation and peace again. But anyone who's been watching the conflicts, and again, I'm talking about major conflicts, but even, you know, localized ones rack up around the world over the years, there's not a very linear trajectory to most of these things. They are going on for record numbers of years and costing record amounts of money to respond to. So there has to be a lot of during, right? We have to sort of combat this fallacy that you cannot build cohesion during a conflict, that you cannot resolve disputes during a conflict, because unfortunately, in many of the countries that have been mentioned here today, those conflicts are generational, right? They're going to last a long time, and you can't wait until they're over to take action. So I feel like getting in on any program or any situation, and one of the other questions posed to me was sort of, how do we take a local approaches to this? I would say beyond the fact that peace building by definition is and must be local, to understand the dynamics, to understand the history, to understand the political economy of what's going on. I also think local actors don't look at things as humanitarian crises or development, needing development gains. They look at situations as, this is the reality that we're facing. We need to combine these types of tools, or they don't even look at them as separate tools. We need to address these conflict needs while meeting the immediate needs and pushing for longer term peace building and inclusive economic growth. So I think that, I recognize that also working for Mercy Corps, this is a bit of a luxury, because a lot of these institutions were started and created for one of those express purposes, or more often than not, for humanitarian and development things together. So I really think it's important, as we examine our role in resolving some of these situations, for the leadership, especially of these organizations, beyond having the tools and the right things like the advancing peace and complex crises framework that we use, having those technical tools is great for those running your programs on the ground. But there really does need to be a mandate from above that we need to find different ways of working, right? The nice thing about Mercy Corps is it kind of started with that mandate of just, let's get things done. But I think there are some shackles that need to be broken in some of our peer organizations and in the system more broadly. So I'm happy to go on. I could go on at length about these different things, but I would say one last thing is I do feel like as we are talking about climate change adaptation, which is a major focus area for Mercy Corps, one of the positive things that I'm seeing is by virtue of what climate change is doing to communities, it's definitely increasing tensions. It's definitely heightening vulnerabilities, right? It's creating, a lot of additional problems. I'm hoping that we can kind of leapfrog past these, old traditional silos and look by definition at climate adaptation programming as something by definition that requires a peace building approach, that requires some humanitarian aspects, and certainly requires looking at future economic growth and inclusion in different ways. So I really feel like we need to seize that moment, not just because it's a good message, but because that's what good climate change adaptation programming is. And hopefully we won't get mired in some of the same trappings and pitfalls that we've experienced in the last 50 or 60 years of a lot of the aid work our organizations do. Thanks.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much, Kate, for those very, very emphatic comments. And interestingly, as you were talking, a lot of questions coming in through the chat, and unusually candid ones. A couple of very large organizations here, Oxfam and Tear Fund, are discussing the same challenges, right? About how do we better articulate the impact that we are having. So this almost does necessitate a separate conversation, discussion, or working group. In this instance, the INGOs who kind of sort of sit in between, for lack of a better word, to be able to find new ways of expressing this. And I turn the question back to you as to what specifically do you think is the best way. But what I'm actually going to do is take speakers, moderators' prerogative, and throw it back to our initial panel, because in many ways I do think that what tends to get absolutely donors are increasingly intrigued and interested in data and evidence-based perspectives, but just because it is a local community perception or perspective doesn't make it any less valid than some national statistic, right? So perceptions are tremendously key, and perceptions of impact are tremendously key as well. So I'd love to be able to turn it back to initial panel and actually start with a somewhat but very related question, and this is specifically for Patricia. It's coming in through the chat from Seratu Sanusi, which is how do we evaluate peace building education specifically? And after Patricia, if it's okay, I'm going to go straight back to the team to ask this broader question. How do you as local organizations evaluate the impact of the project, specifically through community perceptions? Wajdi, you gave a very good example of that very much in the beginning in terms of the comments from an individual. Dr. Samuel, I'd love to be able to hear from you after Patricia about that topic, and then Mariana, and we'll end with Wajdi. Thank you very much, everyone. Patricia, please.
Yes, well, it's such a great question, and just in listening to the Mercy Corps commentary, I just want to, comment on, again, back to integral efforts. So how do business and academia and practitioners work together in more collective ways? But in terms of measurements, and I know at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, which always has some tremendous initiative underway in terms of learning and evaluation, it's the hardest part. And I think it's hard for two reasons, because there are so many variables that come into play in all these initiatives and projects. It's hard to isolate factors that are actually the most impactful. And also financially, we just don't put enough money against it. And it's not just in peace building and conflict resolution, it's in other arenas too. But the way we think about it is, first of all, we often use a reference of what's known as the Kirkpatrick model, which is more common in business settings, where you measure reactions, behavior, learning, and then results. Now, you really want to measure long-term impact, but again, that's a longitudinal kind of analysis, and impact is much harder to measure because of all the variables. Second thing I would share is a great distinction between outputs and outcomes. So often in any endeavor in life, but especially in peace and conflict resolution, people want to focus on the output. So I had a workshop, I did this initiative, I brought this many people together, but that may often be completely disconnected from, well, what were the outcomes? What actually changed? What was caused to happen because you do that? And then, the last thing that I think there's an irony right now, because I'm meeting all day today and tomorrow at the Carter School of Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. And our entire conversation today and tomorrow is, even with an initiative that I described to you earlier, where you're going to bring 25 to 35-year-olds together, you're going to take them through an integral peace leadership program, they're going to produce projects. How will we measure it? And so I go back to, well, we'll have to measure in terms of their learning, any changes in their behaviors, anything that gets produced, outputs, what are the projects, but also what is the impact of those projects long term. And I'm very glad to say that I feel this is one of those cases where we're going to get to use all the tools in our toolbox, whether it's the Scanlon-Monash Index or the Kirkpatrick or specialized assessments that we'll come up with. But, that's nirvana. So that would be my comment.
Thank you very much, Patricia. A very distinct set of tools that we can all leverage in future. Thank you very much for that. And Samuel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on impact specifically, and as it pertains to the messaging, recognizing in this instance the value of a faith-based message in your particular case. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. I think the very first thing for us, in order to measure impact, it all starts by the very design of the intervention. For instance, with the PSA, what we did a target analysis. We did a target audience analysis, trying to understand how the message we will craft. First of all, what would be the pertinence to our audience? Secondly, how do we do audience segmentation based on the level of interest of our targets? So that's how we started through that target audience analysis. One thing that we did also, after working with community radio, we had to integrate from the get-go a feedback mechanism to ensure that as we started designing the PSAs, we took into account the feedback we got from the community. As we put out the dramatized PSAs, we had a chance to interact with listeners to get the feedback on what they thought the perception of the message we were putting out was, not only for themselves, but also within the community. So as I think Patricia said before, the issue is not so much about the output, reporting to the donor, the activities that were done, but we were looking mostly as, have we been able to prevent, let's say, this particular segment of the population in this specific community joining VEOs, but listening to their messaging. Have we been successful in preventing, for instance, a swath of women's to provide peripheral services to VEOs? So basically, in that particular instance, we're always looking at the feedback mechanism so that we are able to get the information after the action was implemented.
Phenomenal, Samuel. And in the very difficult circumstances of having to prove a negative, right? Such as they have not joined, or this house has not collapsed, for example, right? So congratulations on that. And it also raises the broader question, such as those techniques that you're using are very much ones that can potentially or should be potentially applied when we are actually speaking with donors, right? We often talk, you mentioned that feedback mechanism. Rarely have I seen active and lively feedback mechanisms with institutional donors about what are their particular needs and what is their information. How can we adapt our proposals to be able to better respond to their needs as well? So thank you very much for that reminder. And Mariana, I'd love to be able to hand it over to you. I imagine your approach has elicited very interesting responses from the people that have been exposed to us. Tell us a tiny bit more with the minutes that we have, please.
Well, thank you so much. No, I was just listening to Samuel, and one of the things that, for example, we have been having to face since our birth 8 years ago is making people and donors and traditional donors actually go about on how to use and accept new techniques, how to measure them in a different way, because it's not only how it outputs, but also how you actually create a movement, and the speed of this is different than just how many workshops that you do, how many talks that you do, but actually getting people to use the tools, to have usefulness of the tools, to actually get people interested and convincing them that they have the power to change. So social empowerment is our main goal at the end of the line, making, like, saying to citizens, hey, you have the power to change your context. You do not have to wait until the institution comes, the law comes, the funders come. You can do a lot of things, and in the long run, you will find your way to get more funding or get the institutions here or get public policy to follow. But you can change a lot. So we're like a little salmon swimming against the current because we do things differently. And sometimes it is difficult to fit that mold into traditional, especially international corporation outputs, indicators, what they want. So it is actually a way on how to actually make all parties see how we can do this in a greater goal way, and to see, okay, civil society has to be worked on in different manners. It's not doing all over again where we have been doing for many years in international cooperation, but actually doing, and in development aid, it's actually doing something different. How can we empower them? How can we be sure that these people are going to actually have these tools and make them sustainable and not have to depend on the next international funder to come and give them money to continue, but actually empower them so that it becomes their idea, so that they know that they have the power to do it, and have tools that can actually be replicated in a really easy fashion. So I think that is one of the main things with working with civil society today, is seeing what tools we have today, seeing that we have to get a equilibrium between online and offline. It's not only thinking that technology and online tools do everything. It's actually getting the balance between them. How can we potentialize both ways of work together, and breaking boundaries and breaking stigmas, especially in Colombia, for example, in different territories. You always think, how can I go and work in peace building with technology and with civic tech in a not interconnected country? And then you go to the countryside and you find there's more intelligent phones than people in Colombia. So you have to work and you have to break stigmas, and you have to know that there's so much power in these people.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much, Mariana, for that, and for the reminder that every single individual can contribute to peace and peace building, and we can do so in a myriad of different ways, and we can do so in a supported way or an unsupported way. But we each not only have the capacity but the mandate to be able to do that. And with that, I'd love to be able to close out the session. After which I'll hand it back to Nicholas and the team. To give the word to Wajdi. Wajdi, one of the stories that you told at the very beginning about, Israeli volunteers crossing the border to pick up, in this case, Palestinian patients to take them to the hospital, really kind of connects back to what Mariana was just talking about, the power of one, right? I imagine that those must be some tremendously interesting conversations in the car. Tell us a tiny bit more about how you go about measuring that particular impact. I know initially, very early on in the panel, there was a lot of interest about how you were evaluating empathy, for example. Tell us a tiny bit more over the next couple of minutes.
Sure thing. Thank you, Michael. So basically, for every project that we do, if it's training, if it's transportation, if it's whatever that is related to health, we have a common approach, especially in peace building, that we always implement. We start with effective. We believe that if we want to reach to an effective response after building a logic frame, defining our goal, objectives, outcomes, outputs, and the inputs and the activities that we should implement in order to achieve this goal, we take always an approach of the cognitive empathy, and we believe that we have to raise the awareness, self-awareness of the other. So for Palestinians, we try to give them some awareness about Israelis, because what they hear about Israelis is just from news and from political perspectives. These are two neighbor nations that live together now nearly for 75 years, and they barely know each other because they don't speak the same language. So what we do is we speak the people's language. We go to the streets, we go to the field, and we speak their language. We speak with the Palestinians by their language and with Israelis by their language. But the very emotional thing about the driver issue and the driver volunteer is in so many cases, and trust me, the Israeli driver does not know Hebrew, does not know Arabic, I'm sorry, and the Palestinian child knows only Arabic because he doesn't speak English, he's very little, okay? And in many cases, he's not allowed to take his parents with him or his neighbor, so he is by himself with this Israeli stranger. And they talk to each other without even a language. They have only the common language, which is empathy. And when we give them this awareness about the other, and we change their perspectives and we change their attitudes, we reach out to the emotional response from them that they want to know more about each other. This is what we do. We just give them the opportunity to meet, the opportunity to talk, the opportunity to express themselves. And then we find out that people are very good. People want to know each other. People want to live in peace. All nations, all together. I really hope that this answered the question you asked, Michael. The evaluation methods we have at Project Rosanna are very well written, and we have a research committee with the research department. We will start publishing some of our researches and some of our papers very soon, and we have very good data we published. Thank you for everyone. Thank you so much.
Phenomenal. Thank you very much, Wajdi. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Brittany, Mathilde, and Kate. I couldn't get back to you for a second round. Here's what I'd love to do. I'd love to sort of formally close the panel. I'd love to hand it back to Nick and Liz. There is a very interesting question in the Q&A. Specifically, what is your perspective regarding trust-based funding, right? So this is instances where donors basically are giving you the money and entrusting you to be able to implement the project in a way that is flexible enough to be able to adapt the circumstances. Now, TBD, whether this is a fad, a passing fad, or alternatively, whether this is the future of international humanitarian assistance and development or otherwise. But I don't want to go excessively over time. So what I'm going to do is throw it back to Nick, throw it back to Liz. If you consider there to be time for us to have an ongoing discussion, potentially with Brittany, Mathilde, and Kate, that other people can stay around to listen to, sounds fantastic. And if not, we'll close it out there. Thank you very much, everyone. Back to Nick.
8 minutes.
Oh, okay. So this closes 8 minutes ago, but for Peacebuilders, we did a good job because we usually go over. So I think it's next steps. What do? We have to do better, all of us collectively, on telling our story and making the case for our work. If we can't, that's how we get more resources and more champions. I mean, that's what we've been trying to do here at AFP, the Global Fragility Act, right? It's building champions to support our work, but we have to give the evidence in a way that's actionable, practical, makes sense, stories that people remember, and we just have to do a better job at it. So that's what AFP is going to be working on this year, coming forward, building the capacity of our members to reframe and reshape how we are able to tell our stories and build champions. So stay tuned. And as we move into 2024, is it 2024? Oh my gosh, it's the fall already. 2024, that's what we have to do at home, globally, everywhere. So thank you all. I learned a lot and they were fantastic stories. So we're grateful. And this will be recorded and put online. I know that was one of the questions that somebody asked. Thank you.